Jacob Black. A man who simped hard for a taken woman and did absolutely everything wrong. I mean, seriously, from vying for Bella's attention despite the fact that she had a very clear boyfriend, to violating her boundaries, to this relationship, there was nothing Jacob wouldn't do to be closer to Bella. Honestly, with everything he did, it's a wonder there was even a Team Jacob faction in the Twilight fandom to begin with. I honestly think it's more because they liked the idea of him rather than who he really was on the page. And of course, Edward had his own problematic behaviors too. I can see where these Jacob believers were coming from. I too liked the idea of Jacob, but the reality turned out so horrendous. In this video, we're going to discuss why. Hello everyone and welcome to the Reulerverse. I'm Renee Rule, an author who does writing commentary and tells otherworldly stories. And today I am going to attempt to read the mind of Stephenie Meyers in a bid to understand why things went so south with this character. And I must preface, unlike a lot of other people, I don't think that Meyers is a bad writer. When I read the books, I thought her prose was very good. I was turning the page every time, like I couldn't get through it quickly enough because it was very well worded, put together, that kind of deal. And some characters were even well written. So what happened to Jacob? Why is the gap between him and other characters so massive? Let's talk about it. We'll start with his backstory. In terms of background, Jacob Black actually has a pretty good one. Born to seemingly normal parents, Jacob attended school in his early childhood on the La Push Reservation. He and his sisters, Rachel and Rebecca, would sometimes play with Bella, though they never became friends due to Bella living in California. When Jacob was 9, his mother passed away in a car crash. His sisters filled the role of mother for him as he grew up. Eventually, though, these sisters moved away and he was left alone. Jacob had his dad, but he was wheelchair-bound due to a chronic condition. It does not seem like Jacob particularly minded taking care of him, however. He enjoyed his company, even though he did not believe the man's tales about werewolves and other magical creatures. When the Cullens moved into town, Jacob didn't interact with them much. He did not believe in the tales about the Cold Ones and them being dangerous. In his first meeting with Bella in the books, the story he tells about the Cold Ones is simply in passing, and the main reason Bella becomes suspicious about Edward. It really wasn't meant to be anything more. On another note, and I didn't actually realize this until I did some light research for this video, apparently Jacob's role in Twilight was supposed to begin and end there. He was only meant to be an old friend of Bella's who gave her exposition about the Cold Ones and eventually made her suspicious of Edward. However, Meyers and her editor came to like Jacob so much that they decided to give him a bigger role in the story. You guys can let me know in the comments if you think that was ultimately for the better or not. Regardless, this foundation is perfectly fine for a character. Jacob's trauma from losing his mother combined with a sense of dependence on his sisters, followed by them leaving him, would likely give him severe abandonment issues. In hindsight, actually, that could explain his clinginess to Bella and a lot of his problematic behavior later. Also, the audience and characters finding out Jacob's story could have been a great moment of introspection for him, as he's forced to realize his behavior is bad and work to change it. There's just one problem with Jacob's backstory, though. It's hardly mentioned. Like, at all. In fact, I didn't even remember his backstory. If it wasn't for me scrolling through the wiki to remind myself of Twilight lore for this video, I wouldn't have been able to describe it. It's not at all in the movies, and the moments it's mentioned in the books are few and far between. Most of Jacob's scenes with Bella are either him trying to distract her from her breakup with Edward, or her moping about her breakup with Edward. It's all about Edward, not him. Now, you could argue that since the story is from Bella's perspective, and she's not in the correct headspace to get to know another person, that Jacob's backstory would naturally fall by the wayside. But I'm going to respectfully disagree. There are ways to imply someone's faults and fears without having the main character talk to them about it. Stephenie Meyers can make Jacob mention bits and pieces of it in passing and have the reader put it together. She also could have made him do things that imply he has abandonment issues. A perfect moment for this would have been when Bella jumped off that cliff. Jacob saves her life, pulling her from the water. In this moment, his fear of her leaving, like all the other female figures in his life, could have fully manifested. He could have clung to her and freaked out, terrified that she was about to leave him too, and furious that she would do something as stupid as jump. We could have seen Bella try to calm him down and realize how much she means to him. This could have been a raw, vulnerable, and beautiful moment of character growth for both of them, but instead the author uses this as a moment of exposition. Sure, Jacob says what Bella did was dumb, but the scene mostly focuses on the disappearance of Victoria and the unaliving of Harry Clearwater, which would lead to the vampire plot later on. Don't get me wrong, it's important to set up things like that, but Stephenie Meyers could have easily done this and give them an emotional moment. Trust me, I do that all the time with my scenes. There's a way to set up the plot and give characters big moments. Meyers just either didn't want to or didn't think about doing that in the moment that she wrote that scene. Either way, this certainly contributes to how Jacob turned out. So we've established that Jacob has a pretty solid backstory. We've also established that it wasn't used to facilitate his growth. That doesn't equate to the absolute disaster we saw later in the story, though. What we've discussed just makes him a basic and underdeveloped character. Nothing more, nothing less. As we know, he turned out so much worse than that. So let's talk about what happened next and why I believe Meyers might have made such questionable decisions. Over the course of the series, Jacob did 3 extremely problematic things. The first is the most general, but not to be ignored. It has to do with his relationship with Bella. The best way I can describe it is that Jacob is a nice guy. If you've been anywhere on social media, you know what that means. A nice guy is a man who gets into a relationship with a woman solely because he wants to date her. He treats her super well, but if she doesn't want to be with him, he lashes out. This is problematic for multiple reasons, with the main one being that entering into a relationship feeling like someone owes you something is wrong. Relationships are not transactional. We see this nice guy persona multiple times when Jacob and Edward fight, and while I can understand Jacob's reasoning, as Edward isn't a good option for Bella either, I do not condone these actions. Bella decided who she wanted to be with long ago, and all Jacob tries to do is prove why her choice is quote-unquote wrong. He does not respect her ability to make her own decisions, and he does not even try to see her perspective. Yes, Edward is indeed problematic. Yes, there were moments where it kind of felt like Bella was dragging Jacob along after Edward broke up with her, simply because she didn't want to be alone. But Jacob also kind of knew this and stayed around anyway, so, you know, little gray, but I think he's a bit more to blame in that situation. The bottom line is, though, if Jacob truly loved Bella, he would let her go. Instead, it's as if he wishes to possess her at all costs. Speaking of possession, let's move on to that second thing. The second action Jacob committed is much more direct. Yes, I'm talking about the kissing scene. In both the books and the movies, Jacob eventually gets frustrated with Bella and decides to force her to kiss him. I do not need to explain why this is not okay. All of you should know. Understandably, Bella is furious, and in one of the few moments where I was actually rooting for Edward, the two men have a confrontation about the incident. In this moment, I feel like most people who were on Jacob's side were not anymore, or at least they had a serious reason to doubt him, because what the hell? I don't know what Meyers was thinking when writing this scene. We'll get to my assumptions about that later in this video, but one thing is for sure, this should have made Jacob a villainous character. Bella had no reason to trust him after this, and neither did the audience. He should have been alienated from the main characters and either forced to confront his actions, or gets worse and they eventually have to drop him completely. Bella had no reason to trust him after this, and neither did the audience. As you all know, though, they do not drop him as a friend. His story does not end there. There is one final thing that happened. An event that hammered the nail in the coffin of this character. The baby. Yep, we're talking about that again. I mentioned this briefly in the Edward versus Stefan video, but now we're going to touch upon it more. First of all, the whole werewolf imprinting system was a terrible and creepy writing decision that was clearly only a way to foreshadow and therefore quote-unquote justify Jacob imprinting on Renesmee at the end of the story. It seems the author was determined to put that in no matter what. Again, we'll touch upon that soon. But this, wow, this? I went on a long rant about how this assassinated Edward's character, and it did. His reaction didn't make any sense, but if Edward's character was assassinated, then Jacob's was deleted. It wasn't bad enough that he was aggressively pursuing a girl that did not want him. No, as a conclusion to his arc, and what I believe was intended to be some kind of poetic full circle twist, it turns out that the whole time the person Jacob was waiting for was Bella and Edward's child. Ugh, I feel a little sick even just saying that. He never has to confront his past nor his problematic behavior, because as it turns out, the reason he was so drawn to Bella is because he would one day imprint on the child. Honestly, what more is there to say than that? We all understand how abhorrent this situation was, but what made it worse for me was how the characters reacted. The only one we got to see a realistic reaction from was Bella, who lunged at Jacob, screaming at him about what happened. We don't get conflict from Edward, nor his family, who all seem to be fine with it. What I see as the worst sin of all, though, is that Jacob saw this baby and was okay with the feelings he had. Excuse me? I don't know about you guys, but if it were me in that situation, I would be completely disgusted with myself. I would try to get as far away from that child as possible because feelings like that are completely inappropriate. I can already hear some of y'all trying to counter that now. But Renee, that's not how imprinting works. He doesn't actually have feelings for the child. It's a strong instinct to protect her and be by her side. Then when she's old enough, those feelings will develop. Yeah, you know who else tells themselves that? Every, for lack of a better YouTube term, child lover out there. That is a common justification they use for their actions, actually. Now, I do realize that this is a fantasy situation and there's magic involved, so Jacob doesn't really have a choice, but honestly guys, that makes it even worse for me. Because all the problems are still there, it's just that neither of them get a choice in the relationship. Neither of them can actually consent to it. Get that in your head, guys. Consent is physically impossible for both parties in this situation because one has imprinted and the other is a literal child. I know that Stephenie Meyers put this magic system in place to justify the relationship, but the problem is it cannot be justified. Something like this is never okay, no matter what spin you put on it. In fact, I would argue that this inadvertently made it worse due to the lack of a choice any of the characters had in it. In the end, Jacob and Renesmee are forced to be together by the author, and any semblance of a character Jacob has after that is snuffed out. It's impossible to root for him when his character was reduced to a creepy protector of a child against his will. This is one of the worst character regressions I've seen in media. But strangely enough, I don't think that was Meyers' intention. From the little quotes and interviews I've seen of her, she seems like a very nice lady. She's a good writer too. Her other books outside of Twilight are actually really nice. So what happened? I'm going to use my knowledge about the writing process and my own experience as an author to make a few guesses. Before I tell you my takes though, I should let you all know I don't know much about Stephenie Meyers. Not her specific personality, personal life, nor what she said about her reasoning for this story. I know I could easily look that up, but what's the fun in that? I want to take the clues we learned in the books and come to my own conclusion about her intentions. Then you guys can comment down below and tell me if I'm right or not. So, here are my thoughts. Stephenie Meyers began the story as a sort of enemies to lovers focused romance between Bella and Edward. Jacob was never meant to have a huge role, but she and her editor loved him, so she created the love triangle. I also know for a fact that Myers came up with the idea for Twilight after waking up from a vivid dream one morning. Then, within 6 months from conceiving of the idea to publishing, the book was out on the shelves for people to read. Knowing all of this, I can assume a few things. First of all, that timeline is insane. Again, I've published a book, and I can tell you all that 6 months is not nearly enough time to write a draft, edit it, and publish it without it having major errors and plot holes. Just editing alone, high quality editing that is, takes at least 3 months because there are 3 stages of editing and you need to give the editor time to look over the whole thing, then give it back to you, then you make the changes, and then you give it back to them. And print tests take 1 month, assuming nothing at all goes wrong with the printing. It can take weeks for them to be shipped, and then you gotta ship them back. Anyway, it's this whole bureaucratic process. That is 4 months down already. And I'm not even going to touch on planning, cover art, beta readers, or anything else that goes into producing a good book. Second, assuming Stephenie Meyers was on a similar timeline for the rest of the books, which she definitely was considering each book was released a year apart from each other, that doesn't give much room for detailed constructive feedback. She likely had an idea, pushed it through approval of 1 to 3 people, and then it was on the shelves for everyone to see. That means any initial vision she had for the characters, regardless of that vision's flaws or possible implications, was likely put into the final draft so the company could get it out quickly and sell more books. It'd be like if I took the first version of my book, made a few minor tweaks, and published it right then and there. And I'm telling you now, that version was way worse than the final one. There were lots of plot holes, characters that didn't go anywhere, and strange moral decisions that I cringe upon looking at now. I am only one person, so I could not spot every problem, even major ones. They just flew over my head because I was worried about other things. I imagine, again, since Stephenie Meyers is only human, that this happened to her as well. Third, and finally, Stephenie Meyers was clearly very passionate about this project. Despite their flaws, she loved all her characters and wanted the best for them. I think that after developing the conflict between Edward and Jacob, she got really attached to them and wished they could both have Bella, but she knew they couldn't, so she tried to find a workaround. It's also important to note that Twilight's peak was in the 2000s and 2010s. Back then, standards were different. Of course, it was still not okay to be with kids. That has never been okay. But people were able to get away with putting behavior like that in the media much more than today. It was talked about less. Personally, when I first watched the movies as a kid, I didn't even understand what was wrong with Jacob and Renesmee's relationship. I thought it was weird, but that's about it. And I remember hearing a lot of people say the same thing. I believe that Stephenie Meyers also felt this way, that it's weird, but okay because of the things she set up to justify it. Then, by the time it was out, even if she did regret that plot point, it was too late to change. So, to summarize, my assumption about Jacob and the Twilight Saga in general is that he has so many issues because the books came out too quickly. Many parts of it seem hastily put together, contributing to the lack of deep lore, problematic behavior of the male leads, and not great character development. I doubt Meyers actually meant for any of the Twilight series to be bad. I think she worked really hard on it. She just didn't have the time to get it to its full potential due to the insane timeline she was on. I think she gets sad when people hate on it, and that is something I can empathize with. But what do you think? Let me know down below. And if you made it to the end of this video, you are now my favorite person. I had a lot to say about Jacob, and I'm glad that I could put it out there. With that, I hope I've inspired you, and I'll see you in the next one. If you liked this video, check out the links in the description below. It'll give you more content, and it'll go a long way in supporting this channel. Thank you all so much.